2012 was a really big year for me. It was the year I became a dad. It was the year of the London Olympics, which I wasn't massively drawn into because there was this weird shift in mentality around the London Olympics. I think we remember the London Olympics as the anti-Brexit. This idea of British unity and a kind of progressive vision of what Britain could become. But just before the Olympics, it felt quite oppressive. I remember this. I remember the example being that people had missile launchers on the top of their high-rises and stuff like that, as well as some of the people who obviously they had to build on land, and therefore some of that land had to be knocked down. And while a lot of that land was just warehouses and stuff like that, other parts of the land were homes and businesses. The build-up to the London Olympics felt quite dystopian, but afterwards it suddenly felt like this big, oh wow, bright future feeling that Brexit came along and steamrolled. The third thing that was really big for me in 2012, it was my first year teaching in university, so it was my first year teaching a particular module in poetry and performance. I had been teaching other things. I'd been teaching adults, I'd been teaching in schools as well, and the adults I taught were more of the people that paid to be taught poetry in the hope of getting published in the future, or in the hope of getting booked for gigs, or just to be part of a little community of poets, a little community of creators. So I did that kind of thing, but this is my first time teaching undergraduates. Now the mature students were pretty much exactly like those other adults that I taught previously when I'd run these courses. But I hadn't taught those undergraduates, or I didn't have a lot of experience with the undergraduates who have just left school, who are a year or two out from their A-levels. And so I really wasn't prepared in some ways for some of the elements of teaching young people. And one element that was there was that I just remember when I was giving these lectures, and it was quite popular, this module. So there was a room full of 40 students, a small number of mature students, and then some just left school students. And I remember seeing one student, and they were on their laptop, and they were sort of looking up at me a little bit, but they were also looking at their laptop and typing away and going, and I thought, oh my God. Because I was hosting my poetry events. I was still doing a fair few gigs back then. I knew how to entertain people. I knew how to hold people's interest. But this was a different crowd, man. I mean, I could hold interest in a school full of unruly primary school students, and I could actually get their attention and entertain them. But undergraduates, I just hadn't experienced this. So I was assuming, and I know this makes me sound really naive, but I was assuming that student was just really into what I was saying and was writing their notes and was just like, wow, this is amazing. Oh my God. And then I marked their first assignment, and it was like, I realised that they hadn't been paying attention at all. And then I realised that what was happening when that laptop was open is that they were obviously scrolling their social media feed, because it was 2012 and people still did that kind of thing on laptops back then. And probably looking at cat gifs and stuff like that, and just into that, and my vanity was what painted this idea that it was me being naturally enthralling. I didn't notice phones that much. Students didn't necessarily, if they took their phone out, it felt a bit more conspicuous. And I guess phones were in two categories then. It was 2012, so the iPhone wasn't that old, it was about 6 years old, and then you had the Android phones, which were kind of the premium Android phones as well, but also the potato ones. But I don't know, people weren't necessarily taking them out in class, whereas we look at today and some students will just take their phone out and start swishing through it, and I will occasionally say, are you using that phone to make notes from the lecture? And sometimes they just put the phone away and don't say anything, and sometimes they just double down, and if they double down, what can you do? So I just go, okay then. But other students do this thing where they have their phone and they hold it under the table, and then they kind of look at it under the table. But the thing they have to do is, I think, in order to get the phone at the right angle for them to be able to see it, they have to have their arms quite straight. So they're like this. And for them, I think they think that this doesn't look really obvious. That they don't really obviously look like they're looking at their phone. I don't respect their lack of respect for my intelligence and how I can quite obviously perceive the fact that they're on their phone. But I respect the tokenistic gesture that they're not just pulling the thing out and just swiping for it right away. What do they expect it to look like? It's either you're on your phone or a little mouse in a costume has just leapt into your lap and is going, "Shh, I have a secret, but don't let him know." By the way, my name is Niall. I am a poet who writes essays and makes videos because the muse has abandoned me. So quite early on in this module, there was one lecture I was giving on paratext, and paratext, according to the book Life Poetry by Julia Novak, she uses an earlier linguist's idea, not a linguist, I can't remember, it might be a linguist's idea of paratext. Paratext is the text which surrounds the main text. So in a textbook, paratext is the index, the maybe even the preface or something like that, and then there's the text proper, which is the chapters. And so paratext in the context of poetry and performance, or any kind of live performance, is often the introduction. It's the speech that surrounds the main thing. So in a poetry performance, it's the poem and the introduction and maybe interactions with the audience. That's the paratext. So I was teaching this lecture on paratext, and I found this video which doesn't entirely fit in with it, but it's a video of Allen Ginsberg. It's on YouTube. It's called Our Sunflower because it's from a DVD that I think might still be available, which features a visit Allen Ginsberg made to London, I think in the 1970s. And there's something very powerful about this video. Now, I'm not going to play it here on this video because my last video featured a lot of clips. I finally popped my copyright material copy strike. I didn't get a strike, but I think my video got restricted and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I was foolish enough to use actual clips from Frank, the film, last week without sound, and thought that'll be fine. And the thing just automatically got detected, and the video was blocked in several countries, so I had to re-edit it with stills. So I've learnt my lesson from that. So I'm going to put a link to this video in the description, and if you want to watch this in Ginsberg's own words, you can click on that link, but come back here because I've got interesting things to say about it. So this is what I would play to my students. And this is what Ginsberg said. So he's looking at a camera and he's sitting in a garden in London, and he's very intensely focused on the camera before he gives this message. And he says, "If you'll keep your mind on the image in front of you, which is my face in the camera or in your TV tube or screen TV, and realize I'm looking from the other side, directly into a little black hole, imagining that you were there, and also imagining what would be possible to say that would actually communicate through all the electricity and all the glass and all the dots on the electric screen, so that you're not deceived by the image seen, but we are both on the same beam, which is you're sitting in your room surrounded by your body looking at a screen, and I'm sitting in my garden with my body with noise of cars outside, so that we're at least conscious of where we are and don't get hypnotized into some false universe of pure imagery. So that, in other words, you're taking the film in front of you as an image with a grain of salt, as an image rather than as a final reality, and so that you don't get deceived by either my projections or the projections of a newscaster who will follow." So I play that to them. And when I found that clip, it had a very profound effect on me, because all of a sudden I realised how passive it can be when you're looking at a screen, and the way that you do shut down your own physical reality and your own awareness of the physical reality, and you make do almost with the flatness of what is on the screen. I know I've spoken about VR before, and I don't think VR necessarily solves this problem, but it's almost like your mind becomes flat in order to become immersed in the flatness of what is happening in front of you. And what I find really interesting about this video is Ginsberg starts off by struggling with finding the words. He's very aware of what happens when people are just very passive in front of a screen. In this case, it was the television, because once upon a time, television was the most evil thing in the world that rotted the minds of the youth. But he's contending with that idea of what the screen is. But I think he's still been aware that people will just zone out looking at the screen. So Ginsberg, he's aware of this. He's aware of this forgetting of your body, forgetting of the now, forgetting of the moment that happens when we look at a screen. And as he addresses the camera very intensely, he draws attention to his body. He draws attention to what is happening right now with him in the world. and then he's asking you at the same time to focus on what's happening with you in the world. I gave the same lecture last week, and it's really interesting when I kind of point out, actually, yes, that video is about 50 years old. Ginsberg's been dead since the 90s, since 1997, I think. And so at the same time, he's right there in his now, drawing attention to his now, and he's connecting with you in your now. He's there right now, you're there right now, and in many ways, despite there being 50 years apart, you're connecting through your sense of what is now. You're both in now. And some of my students just kind of, I love it though, some of them genuinely go, oh. So it's a really interesting video to play, and it draws attention to it. But one of my favourite phrases is a false universe of pure imagery. And I think we can say that because that can apply to everything. And I think everything in this digital world that we live in today. And I think we all have a moment when we are dragged into a false universe of pure imagery. Now, I spoke in previous weeks about the death drive, about Freud's death drive, and how death drive isn't just this thing where I'm going to drive a car close to a cliff, I'm going to be dangerous, man. The death drive can sometimes be that compulsive, repetitive behaviour, almost like life-denying behaviour. Because the death drive is a natural response, according to Freud, and I think Lacan, and a few others as well. The death drive is a response to the will, as defined by Schopenhauer. I've gone into this in a previous video. I'll leave a link in the description. So the will isn't necessarily a good thing. So the will is almost that sense that you must be doing something right now. You must be overpowering something. You must be conquering. You must be, and all the motivation bros repeat all this stuff as well. They capitalise on this feeling. And this feeling can actually just lead to a lot of self-loathing, because ultimately you didn't ask to be alive. You didn't ask to have this moment of sudden, intense recognition of your own experience and your own lifespan and where you might be along it. So picking up your phone and scrolling through distracting rubbish is actually not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that this moment arrives and you have to fill it with something, and you're not always prepared to embark on writing your own version of Proust or Ulysses or starting a sculpture or something like that. I've been pulled into my own universe of pure imagery recently, in the sense of having a digital experience that I compulsively keep reloading. And while I can be smug about other people's use of social media, I myself have been playing a video game. What video game is this? Is this Fortnite, maybe? Is this one of these games which has quite predatory microtransactions? One of these games that makes demands on your time, like the gacha games especially. Those games where there's always something where you hit a certain wall, and if you pay a little bit of money, then you save yourself a lot of grinding, doing repetitive activity in order to get to the same level. And it's not like that at all. It's an indie game. It's a game that is not designed to make you pay more money. But it is definitely a game that has been robbing me quite aggressively of my time, and it's a game called Balatro, which is a card game at heart. It's a poker game at heart. It's a deck builder as well, and that's the little thing. So it's a game where you play poker hands, and you have a little score that you have to hit, because each poker hand gains a little bit of a score. It has a score that's attached to it, but the score keeps getting higher and higher, and soon the normal poker hands that you're playing won't. Even the best one, even a royal flush, will not hit the bind or the score that you have to hit. So you start collecting these joker cards and modifying the cards that you have, and also having the opportunity to cast cards aside so that you're more likely, your deck gets smaller and you're likely to have the better cards in your hand. All of these little adjustments happen, and it's completely random. I've just thrown water, at my top and at my crotch. I'm sitting here in water. It's almost like Ginsberg again, isn't it? Maybe Ginsberg just possessed me for a second, felt I was describing this video too much and getting caught up in my own world of pure imagery. And so I threw cold, fizzy water at my own crotch. And now I'm awake, and I'm certainly back in my body, and I'm certainly back in a state of embodied physical awareness. It's warming up a bit now though, anyway. I'll try not to give a running commentary of my wet crotch throughout the rest of this. But I will return to the concept of wet crotches, because there is actually something that's related to what I'm going to talk about in a minute. I'm going to put this on the floor away from my feet. So Balatro, I really got into this game, and I would find myself firing up my Steam Deck, my beloved Steam Deck, and I would just end up playing Balatro. And the next moment I'm like, oh, I have to stand up and I have to get up and go over there and make dinner for my family, or I have to go to bed, it's 2 a.m. and I've got work tomorrow. So there's something compulsive about this game. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, playing a game for a long time. There's other games I played for hours. Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Red Dead Redemption 2. Even a similar card battler called Slave Aspire, which robbed me. I think that's still the game I put 400 hours into, something ridiculous like that. But I felt that those games were different because of how they made me feel. And I think that's an important thing to ask. That's where I go back to, how does it make me feel? When I played Breath of the Wild, it felt vast. I played it on the Nintendo Switch, so I played it in handheld mode, not even on a big screen on the TV. And the game still communicated this idea of vastness of the world that it was set in, and this idea of a joy of exploration. And when I did go out into the world, so going out at least every Tuesday to go to the poetry cafe to run the open mic I was making, I would walk from Blackfriars to Covent Garden, and it's a nice walk actually, and sometimes I'd cut through a certain sort of quarter of a city, and I remember walking along and seeing the Shard. Now I was walking the other direction, so I was either seeing the Shard on the train there, or maybe I was walking back. I saw the Shard, and the first thing I thought of, and I actually wrote a little story about this, but the first thing I thought for a second as I looked at the top of the Shard was, is there a Korok seed on top of that? Because in a Zelda game I would spend ages climbing a mountain, a perilous route up a mountain. Sometimes it would rain and I would slide down and I had to wait on a ledge for a little while and then start climbing again. But the sense of fun and exploration had kind of bled into the real world. I wasn't going to climb up the Shard and look for a Korok seed. But the idea that London was this place that I could explore was sort of seeded by playing this video game. And the video game itself had this feeling of curiosity and adventure and freedom to it as well while I was playing it. And those ideas and qualities bled through into my normal life as well. Red Dead Redemption. Red Dead Redemption 2, I still love that game. I love the environment. But I remember playing the original Red Dead Redemption because I wanted to play it before Red Dead Redemption 2. And I played it during the pandemic. So I finished it during the pandemic, during the opening stages of the pandemic, when we didn't know much about this disease and what it would do to ourselves and our lives. And I felt that I was the one going out shopping, and I was the one who had to protect my family and not bring this disease back home and infect them with it. And part of that story of Red Dead Redemption is about John Marsden and his family and his need to keep them protected too. And it really connected, it really chimed. So yes, there was exploration, but there was a hostility to the world too. And again, that played out with my experiences of the pandemic. And so it was, well, perhaps, I don't think the game really took advantage of that dread. Obviously, how could it? But maybe it made the world a bit more of an adventure on one hand. And then on the other hand, it kind of, my feelings towards my family bled into my experience of that particular game as well. I'm saying this because Balatro is a game that I think I put 119 hours into, 100 in a few weeks. So that was pretty much all my leisure time, when I wasn't preparing for work, when I wasn't doing domestic duties for my family, when I wasn't watching Shogun with my wife. I was ultimately just on my Steam Deck and playing this game. And while I played it, I remember distinct moments, and this is not a slight on the creators of the game. I think they've created a fantastic game, and I'm sure other people would love this game. But for me, I remember moments of thinking, I'm not really enjoying this, and yet I can't stop playing it. And after I played it, I felt exhausted. So some of those other video games really enriched my life and really enhanced how I experienced things. And then Balatro, for me personally, wasn't doing that. It was draining me. It was making my life outside the game less fun, and it was swallowing up moments of my life anyway. And anyone who has the hobby of playing video games often has the other time-consuming hobby, a hobby that perhaps takes up even more time than playing games, and that time-consuming hobby is called figuring out what game to play next. and you're just reading articles, reading reviews, going on forums, stuff like that. It's another kind of time sink swallower thing. And again, Death Drive, the will, there's a reason why we do it. I think it's important to note that often what we look for is we go on how long to beat, or we go on forums and we look at how long we might end up spending playing the game, because video games can be very expensive. And so you sort of think to yourself, oh, if I'm going to spend this much money on a game, hopefully I'll get lots of value out of it because I'll play it for hours and hours and hours and hours. And when I think about Red Dead, and when I think about games like Witcher 3 as well, where Witcher 3, it's not so much about the world that you're exploring, but it's more about the people you meet and the little missions and stories that you have from these people. But there's something rewarding about that as well. And that feeds into this idea that everyone you meet in the real world has a story to tell. So I think there's that mutual enrichment. So yes, there are games I played for a long time, like Red Dead, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, that there are many hours, so in that sense they were great value, because whatever I paid for them, if you go by a per hour rate, it's nothing. But when I look at how long I've played a game for, I'm missing out on other metrics. And then I do think about games like A Short Hike or Abzu, where these are games that give me an experience. And again, it's a wonderful, powerful experience, and the game's done in a few hours. Or games like Spiritfarer, which I think you can play it on Netflix. It's a very easy game to play. You should play it if you have Netflix and a phone, and you're not a gamer. It's a wonderful game. That game made me feel so emotional and attached to the characters, and the way that I had to say goodbye to all of them eventually. And some of these games are just a 2-hour experience, but it's an amazing 2-hour experience, and you still remember the game, and the game enriches your life. How does that game make me feel? But it's not just this game. This could open up into other things, but I don't know why, but I was thinking of VR, and I wanted to know what Jaron Lanier thought about VR, especially with recent things such as the Apple Vision Pro and the Quest 3. That there's still this big pitch to make VR part of our lives, and he's famous for two things. He's famous as the sort of godfather of virtual reality, so one of the original pioneers that worked on virtual reality. But he also wrote a book about deleting your social media too. And so I think he's very aware of his addictive mechanisms. And I think that's very true, because a lot of social media is created with the same mechanics that a lot of those addictive video games are created with as well, and for the sole purpose of keeping you on that media and scrolling for as long as possible. I looked up what Jaron Lanier felt about VR, and he wrote this amazing article for The New Yorker about it quite recently, I think back in February, and I want to read one paragraph from there because I love it, because I think it gets to the ethos of this thing that I'm talking about. So here we go. When I put on a VR headset, I still notice that I am floating there, that I exist independently of the information I experience. But then there's the moment I take off the headset, which is the very best. In the 1980s, we used to try to sneak flowers or pretty crystals in front of people before they would take off their headsets. It was a great joy to see their expressions as they experienced awe. In a sense, this was like the awe someone might experience when appreciating a flower while on a psychedelic drug. But it was actually the opposite of that. They were perceiving the authentic ecstasy of the ordinary and new. I think it reminds me of... So he's explaining that with VR, but I think that really speaks to what I was just saying about how a game can sometimes change the world that you're in. It can enrich your environment, because we're never experiencing our environments purely. We're normally experiencing our environments with the narratives that we're telling ourselves as well at the same time. So I think a game can be really interesting by either A, giving you a different narrative that you can suddenly look at your environment from, like a narrative about adventure or how valuable other people are and interesting other people are when you really explore. But it can also be something that actually for a second works as a palate cleanser and almost wipes the narrative slate clean, so that when, as with Jaron Lanier, when he takes off those goggles, the world returns in a very sudden and intense way. So the world kind of gets returned back to you. And that's what I felt that what Jaron Lanier says there, it really works. And so he's not an advocate of having your VR visor on as you do a whole day's work and stuff like that. He is very much an advocate of VR as having this intense digital experience and then taking off your visor and either greeting the world anew or having that experience inform what's happening. And so this leads me to Ginsberg, because I was thinking about Ginsberg, what he was saying in that video, and wondering how would he feel about all these digital experiences we have today. Because Ginsberg, yes, he in some ways he was like the bodhisattva of the beats in some ways. You know, he kind of presented himself as this religious figure, but at the same time, from reports of a lot of people that have experienced him, so I have second-hand knowledge in that sense, because I have chatted to people that knew him or spent time with him, and they said a lot of them say Madman's just he was a bit full of himself at the same time. And I remember thinking this when I saw an image of him at the I think the Poetry Incarnation. I know it had a bigger name than that, at the Royal Albert Hall. So he came and read some poetry at the Royal Albert Hall in the 60s, and the Royal Albert Hall sold out very quickly, which is amazing. Poetry selling out. The main venue fills out the Royal Albert Hall, him and some other poets. And I remember seeing him sat there. They kept on cutting to footage of him sat there watching, but he was sat there almost in this way where he's sort of going like that, almost like he's aware everyone's looking at him. Oh, I'm Ginsberg. And so I thought, yeah, sometimes I think he comes across as a bit full of himself. But then someone else told me, and again, I have no confirmation about this, but I'd started looking for confirmation, which was actually the reason why he was sat there like that was because he peed himself, and he'd peed himself while he was there, and he was quite incontinent, and so when he peed himself, he was just sat there and just thinking, can everyone stop looking at me? I feel really self-conscious because I've peed myself. And then he went up on stage, and maybe he dried off by then. Again, can you see how this was relevant? Because I have kind of dried off actually, so that's quite good. But I thought, is this true? So I did. I googled Allen Ginsberg incontinence, or Allen Ginsberg pee himself, and I got this amazing essay, which has got nothing to do with that gig at the Royal Albert Hall, by Tyler Stoddard Smith, and I've put a link in the description. And it's an essay about when he was a kid. His mum and dad lived on campus, on a university campus, and they would often take care of the writers and the poets when they came over to read in the campus. So he ultimately had Allen Ginsberg as a house guest when he was a kid. And it tells this story, which I won't go into too much detail, but part of the story is Ginsberg peeing himself, because he was passing a kidney stone. So I don't know how well the time... This sounds like it was the late 70s, early 80s in this story. So I don't know whether that confirms the thing about the Poetry Incarnation or not at the Royal Albert Hall. But Ginsberg, so this kid wakes up to find this beat poet shuffling about his kitchen looking for some juice, and then he takes juice from the fridge and he drinks it straight from the carton, which really impresses the kid, because he's really impresses Tyler Stoddard Smith as a child, because he sees it as a rebellious thing to do. Now, you should go and read the article, because it's a really fun article about just the kid meeting this poet. But I think that the centerpiece of the article is that the kid gets his Atari 2600 out and starts playing video games. And I think Ginsberg's in the bathroom when he starts off, and he's playing Frogger. So Frogger's the classic 2600 game where the frog starts off, has to navigate a motorway. I think Crossy Road is definitely taking inspiration from Frogger, and then finally has to navigate an alligator-infested swamp in order to get home without dying. And once you complete the level, it just, like all these games at the time, you just play a more difficult version of that level and see how far you can get. So the kid's playing it, and then this voice from behind him says, "Oh no, you killed the frog, man," and it's Ginsberg. And the next moment, he takes an interest in this game. So yeah, Ginsberg did play video games, and I'll read a couple of excerpts from this essay just to finish this all off. Ginsberg starts playing it, and he says, Ginsberg began to take a liking to Frogger. He had interesting questions about the frog's motivation and the ephemeral qualities of the driftwood logs. He even managed to make it to level 2, at which point my prepubescent male pride swelled up and I made him wait for 30 minutes while I racked up as many points as possible. I believe he understood my behaviour, as all poets and children are innocent, albeit fierce competitors. So, interestingly, I like the idea of his curiosity. Yes, it's a game with these mechanics, it's a stressful game to play, but there's a curiosity about the logs and about the frog and about the environment of the game and the atmosphere. So even though it's these crude, blocky Atari 2600 pixels, there's still a world in the game, and it seems that the world had Ginsberg's curiosity. But later on, the kid takes out another game called Combat, which is a tank battler. Here's what happened when Ginsberg started playing this tank battler with Stoddard Smith. So he's playing this tank battler game with this boy, and let's see how the peace-loving beatnik takes to it. So it says, "I've never in all my years been taken a beating so badly at combat. It's the angles, man," he said to me. "You have to look at the angles, anticipate where your shells are going to bounce. You can't be too aggressive. You have to wait for the right moment." Then bang, my pastel green tank exploded in a blast of low-res gore, leaving me hopping mad, and Ginsberg eager for more. So Ginsberg seemed to really enjoy playing this tank battle game and got caught up in that one more run mentality, to the point when the kid's dad came in and said, "Oh, it's time for lunch now. Lunch is ready. It's being served. And we've got some professors and students who really want to talk to you about poetry." Ginsberg was just in the thick of this game and was probably getting, gamer rage. And he says, "One damn minute," he growled, maneuvering his tank toward a bunker. "Yeah, Dad. One damn minute," I aped. My father began to grumble something about how profanity would not be tolerated in my house. But Ginsberg set him straight. "Forgive them, Father," said the man on the cross one Friday long ago, he said, proceeding to annihilate another one of my tanks. So it's really interesting that even with Ginsberg, who we started things off with this video of Ginsberg talking about how we can't get seduced into this world of pure imagery, at the same time experiences two games, one where he has a curiosity about the environment of a game and this frog and the story that's being told, and one where he's just caught up in all these little dopamine Skinner boxes that make you just want to play one more go, and when someone asks how you're doing, you just get more aggressive at the same time. One more game, like that. He's just getting gamer rage. Probably, but even though he's, by all accounts, he's absolutely murdering this child at this game at the same time, and how he doesn't really want to go and talk about poetry with his professors and students in the other room, because he's just more involved in the joy of absolutely destroying a child at a video game. Which just goes to show that, none of us are averse to this kind of thing. We're limited humans with human brains that can be taken advantage of. But again, how do we stop ourselves being taken advantage of? Well, this is what happened, guys. I deleted Balatro. I kind of had a moment of insight and thought, you know what? I know how this game makes me feel. If you have a game and it makes you feel great and you love that kind of thing, then that's fine. I'm not judging you, but I'm just saying, for me, judging myself, I deleted it. And it's just been a really good guide with any app. I know it sounds really simple, but just to have that little moment, a bit like Ginsberg when he says, "Be there in your body, be there now." Have that moment of now and just ask yourself, how does this thing make me feel? I think I will leave it there. Thank you for watching. I am dry now, so that's good. Just felt very serendipitous, didn't it? Now, I did say that my name is Niall, and I write essays and make videos. Because I'm a poet who makes essays and writes videos because the muse has abandoned me. But there is an essay covering this very thing. So what I normally do is I write the essay on my button down, and then I talk through the same ideas in the video that I make afterwards. So if you're stuck around this long and you want to revisit those ideas, you can read the essay and other essays on my button down, and you can even subscribe to it and have it emailed to you. I think every Friday is normally when I post these essays. These videos, I try not to make promises because I have a chaotic home life and I don't always get the time to do it. But right now there's a little couple of hour window on a Saturday morning where I get the flat to myself and I'm able to do this. But thank you for watching. You have a good one. And I am going to just continue to dry off now. Thank you.